Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. In today's video, I'm continuing the series on an introduction to the various methods of qualitative research. I began this series by discussing in a few videos an introduction to narrative research. Then we progressed the discussion into an introduction to phenomenological research. In today's video, what I'm going to do in this new series in two halves, there'll be a first part and a second part. I'll be doing an introduction to participatory action research. The majority of the discourse is guided again by John W. Creswell, second edition Qualitative Inquiry in Research Design, choosing among 5 approaches, and this is a Sage publication. But specifically for participatory action research, I've used Alice McIntyre, right? Participatory Action Research, Qualitative Research Methods series. For me, I really like the guide. It's user-friendly, it's very in-depth, it gives a detailed account. So I'm using a combination of McIntyre and Creswell to discuss participatory action research. And also, I have a huge fondness for participatory action research myself. And with that, let's begin the analysis of the third of the 6, which will be participatory action research. Again, those of you who are just watching, as I said, I'm going to be discussing 6 different methods social scientists use to conduct research. The first was narrative, second was phenomenological, this one's going to be participatory action research, the one after that will be grounded theory, then we'll do ethnography, and we'll wrap it up with case studies. Okay, so, one last thing, the notes are available online. I'll put a link in the description box. Click the link in the description box, it'll take you to the PDF. Download the PDF, print it, follow along. There'll also be a pop-up banner that pops up on the video. Click that. It'll take you to the PDF, follow along, print it, and follow along. So this is introduction to methods of or qualitative inquiry, qualitative research. And this is section 3.1 in the notes. And it's, again, this is participatory action research. Okay, I'm going to abbreviate participatory action research as PAR. Alright. Again, a lot of this is coming through a sort of a blended analysis from Creswell and Alice McIntyre. Alright, participatory action research is research that directly involves both the researcher and the participant in the research project. And this is sort of the hallmark. This is what defines participatory action research as distinguished from narrative research or phenomenological research. In narrative research and phenomenological research, you have the researcher, and then you have the participant. And what's happening in this research, if it's phenomenological or it's narrative, there's a series of questions that the researcher asks, and a question of answers, which become our data. And the questions and the questions are given by the researcher, the answers are supplied by the participant, and this data is used to assess the significance of some meaning, right? And we talked about how theory is applied to the assessment of data. The example that I gave in previous videos was one of post-colonial theory, so you can imagine someone's doing a post-colonial theory, goes around, does a phenomenological analysis or a narrative analysis, narrative research, and applies post-colonial theory to the information that was recorded, and that's the way that the research unfolds. Right, so that the researcher and the participant are separate, right? And the data becomes a product of the research, right? And that is because of the participant's relationship. And participatory action research is completely different, right? In participatory action research, and I want to give you just a sort of a brief, and this is my version, right? There's many different versions of this, but my version of this, as you know, I've done like 70 video series on Paulo Freire. Maybe it's not as much as 70. Maybe it is as much as 70. 60 or 70 video series on Paulo Freire. And in Paulo Freire, what he does in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which I'm not going to get into a lot of detail now, is that he dissolves the demarcation between the teacher and the student, right? Basically what Freire said is that the teacher is also a student and that the student is also the teacher, so that properly speaking, the teacher has something that he or she can learn and the student has something that he or she can give. So that's Paulo Freire's sort of discussion very, very loosely in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. In participatory action research, it follows in that Freirean sense, right? The researcher becomes a participant of the research, and the participant becomes a researcher in the research, right? So that it's more of a collaborative endeavor, right? It's no longer just researcher-participant, but what Freire would call, he doesn't say this is not Freirean, Freire says the teacher's student and the student-teacher. Similarly, you can use that same sort of distinction in participatory action research. The researcher becomes the participant, and the participant becomes the researcher. So we have the researcher-participant and the participant-researcher. What does that mean? You can think of participatory, and I'm going to go into more formal detail in a second, but just generally so you have a quick sort of grasp of what it is that we're discussing. In participatory action research, you can think of it as the type of immersion research, right? Where the researcher immerses him or herself within a given community and sees what some of the plights of the community might be, what some of the nature of oppression or struggle that the community might be facing, and engages the community for information, right? There isn't necessarily a pre-existing theoretical framework, though theoretical frameworks might apply to it. What happens is that the researcher participates with the participants in resolving some immediate communal problem, and it's almost always going to be sort of community-based research. So if you're interested, not exclusively, community can include teaching. I think McIntyre talks about teaching. I think she did it with respect to education. But you can think about community development and so on, right? It's usually community-based research. So if you're interested in community-based research, more than likely the model that you're going to end up using, though you can use a phenomenological model to do community-based research. The best community-based research, aside from ethnography, and that's more sort of cultural, is participatory action research. So that's sort of just a very, very sort of general scope of, if you're interested in community-based development, community-based research, then it's probably the case that participatory action research is going to be the best research theoretical model for you conducting your research. Okay, so as we said, we're trying to sort of dissolve the demarcation between researcher and participant. The researcher has participation that he or she will be involved in this research. And the participants will have things that they know and be able to educate and contribute to the development of the research. So that there really isn't, properly speaking, in participatory action research, there's varying degrees of it, but there really isn't any ownership of the research, right? The ownership is collective ownership when it's done, at its best. All right. So there are 4 tenets to participatory action research. So let's write that down. Alright, so the 4 tenets of participatory action research. The first one is an actual quote, and you can follow along with the PDF, just download it and see what we're discussing. 1, quote, collective commitment to engage an issue or a problem. Collective commitment to engage an issue or a problem. So the first tenet of participatory action is that it's collective. It's collective, right? And part of this collectivity is what? We recognize that the collectivity in participatory action research is a combination of the researcher-participant and the participant-researcher, right? This is the collective. So that we have a researcher that enters a community of potential participants, and participants will be selected from this community. But upon entering the community, the researcher becomes a participant. And in engaging with the participants have information that they can give the researcher, so they, in a sense, become a researcher, right? So what happens is that participatory action research, at its theoretical best, is an immersive, community-based research program where the researcher helps to engage the participants in problem solving.